Hello and welcome to Motivated Learning, presented by Visual Learning Solutions. I am your host, Buddy Broyles. Motivated Learning is a program created for the education and learning design community to raise awareness about the people and the reason for quality professional educational training. I'm thrilled to continue Season 2, Episode 3 now, which is available on both our LinkedIn and Facebook channels on Visual Learning Solutions pages. Today I'm excited to welcome Paul Matthews, CEO of People Alchemy. Paul is one of the leading learning and development experts with 3 best-selling books to his name. He is known for reducing complex theory down to practical tools and sharing them in a way that everyone can use to get better results. As well as being a sought-after speaker, Paul provides consultancy services, training workshops, and webinars for blue-chip clients around the world. Welcome to the show, Paul. How are you today, sir?
I'm very well, thanks. Great to be here.
Thank you so much. And you're joining us from the UK. How's the weather over there?
Grey, but it is England, so I guess that's to be expected.
Sure. Like Texas, it's hot, but different every day. So let's jump in. Let's get to know a little bit more about you. If you can just give us this short version of your full career history. Tell us how you started and how you ended up where you are now.
Well, I suppose if you go far enough back, you've got to talk about the primordial soup from whence we all came, but it's probably too long a story. Well, I grew up on a farm in New Zealand, and I think that farming background gives me a kind of a practical way to approach things. I ended up graduating as an engineer, so I didn't start out in learning and development and never really got into it until later on in my career, and that was kind of almost by accident. But when I got into learning and development, I started to realize there was a lot that wasn't right about it when I was looking at it as an engineer. If I was designing machinery with that level of failure rate, I'd have been killing my clients, I think. So I started looking at it, I think, very differently to what many people do. And I came into it without a lot of the preconceived ideas and background that a lot of L&D people have. So I've been in L&D now for, well, nearly 25 years, so quite a while. And a lot's changed in that time. And the things that I was doing in L&D 25 years ago, I look back on now and kind of shudder and think how bad was that, But that was how we did it back then. So a lot has changed. And I'd like to think I'm, one of the people who's encouraging some of that change in better directions. So I don't know if that's the kind of potted history you were looking for.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we all get our start somewhere, and we've all witnessed a significant amount of change, in the past, especially the past 20 years, with the advent of the basically handheld digital devices. I mean, we're talking early 2000s, and all of a sudden everyone's got this in their hand. Now, cell phones are one thing, smartphones are different, and that's a lot of how we deliver. So you founded People Alchemy. Tell me about the process there and your goals with that business.
I think originally when I started, it was the middle of 1999, so we've been in business quite a while. And originally we started as a sort of a coaching company doing various different consultancy work, sometimes in the blue chip market, sometimes with smaller companies. And I guess I got into the idea that a lot of what I was doing wasn't working so well. And we were delivering some training. And from there, I started talking to people more about, well, what's working and what's not. And that's what sort of got me on this whole sort of bandwagon of informal learning and learning outside of the formal part of what people do when they're in an organization. And so I've ended up specializing in, well, you might call it informal learning, or learning that happens outside of the formal delivery that typically happens in the classroom. And that's brought me into this whole concept of things like performance consultancy, performance diagnostics, learning transfer, and learning workflows, and a lot of other stuff that people aren't paying enough attention to. A lot of people think the classroom is all they need, whether that's physical or virtual, and a lot more is required to get what we're looking for as an end result, which is the behavior change that we want, really.
Well, you mentioned learning workflows. What do you mean by that? How do you define learning workflows for our audience?
Yeah, that's always it's a funny one, that one. It's a term I've been starting to use over the last year or so, and realized that well, here's a provocative statement. If you want to get behavior change in the people who are going through a learning and development initiative, you are going to have to use a learning workflow, whether you use that explicitly or implicitly. And by a learning workflow, I mean a sequence of activities. Because if you think about it, in order to change behavior, people need to go through a sequence of things over a period of time for that behavior to settle in, embed, and be sustainable over time. So if we want to deliver new behaviors to people, we're going to have to take them through a program, a sequence of things to go and do. Some of which might be to go and consume some e-learning, consume a video, go to a classroom and so on. But there's also, they're going to need to do things like practice, experiment, reflect, and so on. So that whole sequence of activities spread over time, if you like, the turn-by-turn instructions to get to the end point, the end destination, is a workflow. By any definition, it's an orchestrated sequence of activities. So we can design a learning workflow that will get people from where they are to a new way of behaving. And that's what I mean by a learning workflow.
Tell me a little bit about the industries you serve, you know, kind of based on the type of training you create, you know, and where the needs are at this time.
Well, we don't really deliver training as such as a company. We're really a software company, and we've built a platform that manages learning workflows. So,
right.
But also separate to that, I do consultancy, as you said earlier, with blue chips, and I work with larger organizations typically with their L&D strategy, with thinking about, well, where are we now? Where do we want to be? How does L&D need to behave? What's the brand of L&D? And then also I will run workshops on things like performance diagnostics, you know, training design, stuff like that. But really all focused on the learning transfer piece. It's actually getting the performance we want out the other end. So that's where the focus is. So we don't go out and do training in management or leadership or something like that. What we will do is help people improve the programs they've got by introducing all of the bits that have to surround a formal program in order to make it actually have an impact out there in the workplace.
So what I hear you describing a little bit, and I've mentioned in a previous conversation about some of the work that we create, is a lot of the practices and the programs are missing, and I think that's what your software can help with, is actually measuring the outcome. You know, giving the basically whoever's funding or creating the training an opportunity to have the results in front of them, the metrics, if you will. Is that in line with what you're trying to achieve?
Well, to some extent, yes. See, as an engineer, I'm looking at this thing called training or learning or whatever the L&D initiative is, and thinking we want to get a certain level of results out the other end of that. What do those results have to be? Is to produce typically some kind of behavior change, unless you're talking about compliance training where you're ticking a bunch of boxes. But if you're talking about developmental learning, upskilling, reskilling, or whatever, you want people to be able to do things differently. So you are fundamentally talking about behavior change. So then the question becomes, how do we deliver that set of behaviors that we want to those people, rather than how do we deliver a set of content to them and then cross our fingers and hope it makes a difference in the real world. So really it's about that whole, how do we deliver behavior change?
Well, speaking of making a difference, you know, the show is Motivated Learning, and I want to know, what drives you? You know, you've got your history and as an engineer and all the things you've witnessed, but what are your mantras? What are the things that, kind of get you going to achieve your goals?
Well, I think one of the things that, the expression is to get you out of bed in the morning, is I think learning and development as a sector or a discipline or a profession has a huge lever it can pull, and most people in L&D have no idea they've got that lever or are pulling it effectively if they do know they've got it. So I think L&D can make a massive impact across an organization. It's got much more leverage than logistics or R&D or a number of other things, because it's directly affecting how well people can do their jobs and execute the corporate strategy. And there's a big impact from there on into there. If people are having meaningful work and doing it well and feeling satisfied, that's got an impact out into their families and the wider community. So I think there's a huge game to play, and so many L&D people just don't play it well. They kind of hide their light under a bushel, and so that's one of the things. Is I think helping L&D be more effective is actually it's leveraging in a way that other parts of the organization don't have the opportunity to do.
Has it been your experience that, and you made a really good point here, is the L&D side, say even it's usually integrated with HR or other training elements, they seem to be the underserved part, whereas sales, marketing, those tend to get the budgets and the drive and lead businesses, if you will. But what we found, and I'm sure you'll agree, is when you train your people well, empower them with knowledge and the tools to do so, when you invest in them and show that you're investing in them, you have a greater outcome and lead to success, support of the entire environment. Is that what you're witnessing?
That's part of it, but as well as investing in them in that way, you also have to make sure that the environment they're operating within is friendly rather than inimical to what they're trying to achieve. There's little point in training someone so they know what to do and then they're unable to actually do it because the environment they're in, the culture they're in, the processes they're having to deal with stop them from doing it. So you've got to look at this thing in a much more holistic way than most L&D people do. And that's why they end up often not getting the results they could get. And when they don't get those results, of course, they are seen as the poor relation. The reputation of L&D, doesn't stand up well. And so they don't get the kudos, the budget, and the kind of respect, if you like, that other parts of the organization might well get. So it's kind of, it's self-fulfilling, that thing. So it's really important that L&D steps up to the business and talks to the business about what it wants and then finds a way to work with the business to help them deliver on the strategy, rather than saying, we're here to do L&D and we'll take your order.
Well, talk to me about the current environment and how you're pivoting at People Alchemy to serve an adjusting learner base. I mean, people working from home or displaced and so on. What strategies are you working on now?
Well, it hasn't really changed that much of what we're doing. Our platform has always been focused on the remote side of learning in terms of helping people go through the activities they need to do, many of which will be in the flow of work while they're working, whether that's at home or wherever it is. So we've done quite well out of the pandemic in that sense. We've had record months since it started. So there was an initial dip, but we're not doing anything different. We're picking up new clients, so we're pretty well positioned. So it's kind of gratifying. I also feel for all the companies that are suffering in many ways as a result of the pandemic. So I really do feel sorry for those that by happenstance found themselves in sectors and in places that were hammered by the pandemic.
Well, it sounds like you can help. However, so on that note, let's get them in touch with you. So we'll put on the screen real quick the best ways to reach out to you, and of course you can find him on Twitter. LinkedIn is a great resource for all types of professionals, and then email Paul, of course, at People Alchemy. Real quick, Paul, can you talk to people who are struggling, L&D people who are either struggling in their current position or they're jumping into from another career, kind of give them a little bit of advice on what they can do now given all the different constraints and challenges in our market. I mean, how can the lever you mentioned, how can they make a difference now?
I think the way to capture that is don't get sort of hoodwinked by your job title or the title of the department you're in. This learning and development department shouldn't be about learning and development, quite frankly. It should be focused on helping the organization execute its organizational strategy. So you're really talking about how do we improve people the way they do things so that they can perform appropriately. Now, they might need to learn something while they are learning how to do things differently, but ultimately you've got to be delivering, for want of a better word, delivering behavior change to people, not delivering learning. If all you're doing is delivering learning, you're going to fail by and large. So
well said,
I think
well said.
It is really focusing on that end goal, the end in mind. I mean, Stephen Covey had it right. Let's focus on the end in mind, which is that behavior change.
Well, terrific. I really appreciate you joining us today. Thank you so much, Paul.
You're very welcome.
Excellent. And for the rest of you, please reach out if you have any questions about this show using the social media available on your screen. Of course, you can find us on LinkedIn, on our channel on LinkedIn. Feel free to give us a phone call, find us on Facebook, or if you have questions, just email us at info@visuallearningsolutions.com. We provide services such as instructional design, e-learning, instructional course development, and so much more, including video production in both our studio or out in the field at your corporate location or event center. Also, if you wish to host a similar show to this one, we can help, from developing the concept to set and show design, along with full production and marketing of your product. Thank you again for watching, and we hope you will tune in or even consider joining us as a guest on a future program. Thank you and have a wonderful day.